It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, Jasmine Mitchell was laughing with her best friend, the chatter of their voices mixing with the hum of the upscale restaurant, and the next, the manager was standing at their table. His face was tight, the kind of expression that didn't belong in a place like this. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you'll have to leave." The words hit her like a slap. It wasn't the polite tone of a request, nor was it a misunderstanding. It was an order, as if she wasn't even human enough to warrant a second thought. Jasmine blinked, her chest tightening as she looked around. The other patrons avoided her gaze, all too aware of the power dynamics at play. "I'm sorry, what?" Jasmine's voice shook, but she forced herself to stand, clenching her fists under the table to steady her anger. The manager didn't flinch. "You heard me. You need to leave." Her heart raced, panic creeping in as the restaurant seemed to close in on her. "You're kicking me out. Because I'm black?" Beat of silence. The tension in the air thickened, the words unspoken but loud as a drumbeat. The manager didn't respond, but his eyes told the story, a cold dismissal. Jasmine could hear her breath catching, the reality of the situation sinking in. She looked to her friend, but they were already getting up, awkwardly scurrying away. No one would stand with her. She was on her own. The door loomed ahead, a reminder of how little she mattered. "Please leave now," he said again, his words colder than before. Her chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes, but Jasmine held her ground. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me why." Jasmine Mitchell had been looking forward to this night for weeks. A celebration dinner at one of the finest restaurants in the city, marking the success of a recent promotion. She and her best friend Ava had dressed up, Jasmine in a sleek black dress that hugged her curves just right, and Ava in a red ensemble that turned heads the moment they walked in. It was supposed to be a night of joy, a reward for all their hard work. They had been chatting for almost an hour, enjoying their wine, the soft glow of chandeliers above, the hum of other conversations when it happened. The door swung open, and the manager approached their table. His eyes immediately locked on Jasmine. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice tight but controlled, "but you'll have to leave." Jasmine blinked, confused. "What do you mean? Is something wrong?" His eyes flicked to Ava, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The manager's gaze hardened. "I'm afraid we can't serve you. You need to leave." Ava looked between Jasmine and the manager, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. The tension in the air thickened, the soft murmur of the restaurant turning into a suffocating silence. Jasmine felt the eyes of every patron on her now, all of them aware of the exchange, none of them speaking up. "Wait, what?" Jasmine's voice shook as she pushed her chair back, standing up to face the manager directly. "Why?" The manager's face was impassive, his posture rigid. "You're disrupting the atmosphere." Jasmine's chest tightened. She was already beginning to feel the heat of humiliation spreading across her skin. "Disrupting," she repeated, her voice low but full of disbelief. "Because I'm black." His eyes flickered for just a moment too short to reveal guilt, but just long enough for her to feel the sting of his answer. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating before he spoke again. "You need to leave now," he said, his tone colder this time. Jasmine's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to shout, to scream, to tear apart the calm facade of this place, but something stopped her. The helplessness washed over her, a cold reality that sank in deep. This wasn't about her behavior. This wasn't about anything she had done. It was about who she was. She looked around the restaurant, eyes desperate, searching for any sign of solidarity, but none came. Everyone just watched. With a shaking breath, Jasmine finally spoke. "You know what? Leave. But I'm not going to forget this. I'm not going to stay silent." The manager barely acknowledged her words, only turning on his heel and walking away as though he'd done nothing wrong. Ava, her face pale, hastily gathered her things and followed him. Jasmine stood there for a moment, her hands trembling, anger boiling inside her. She wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. Jasmine's apartment was eerily quiet when she returned that evening. The noise of the city outside her window seemed distant, muffled by the heavy silence inside her home. She dropped her purse on the hallway table, the familiar weight of the leather bag now feeling heavier than ever. She kicked off her heels, the sharp click against the wooden floor echoing through the empty room. Her eyes moved across the space, settling on the dining table where a half-finished bottle of wine and 2 glasses still waited. They had been so excited about this dinner, about celebrating her promotion, about the night that was supposed to be special. Her hands shook as she moved to the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. She stared at it for a moment, then set it down without opening it. The familiar feeling of unease, the kind that had followed her for years, the kind she thought she was used to, surged through her again. It was a different kind of fear now, one she couldn't shake. She had been humiliated, but more than that, she felt small. As if she had just been reminded that, no matter how far she climbed, there was always someone who would remind her that she was less than. The phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. She glanced down to see a message from Ava. "Ava, I'm so sorry, Jazz. I wish I could have said something. I didn't know what to do." Jasmine stared at the words, the bitter taste of them lingering in her mouth. Ava had been her best friend for years. They had gone through everything together. High school, college, their first jobs. They had promised to always be there for each other. But tonight Ava had been silent. She hadn't stood up for Jasmine when she needed it most. She hadn't even looked her way when the manager had singled her out. Jasmine gripped the phone in her hand, feeling the tears welling up. "I didn't know what to do." The words cut through her like a blade. She didn't respond right away. The silence in the apartment was deafening, the weight of what had happened crushing down on her chest. She couldn't process it all at once. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, it was too much. Finally, after several long minutes, she typed a reply. "Jasmine, you could have said something, Ava. Anything. But you didn't. You just walked away." Her thumb hovered over the send button, hesitation washing over her. But in the end she sent it. She needed to say it. She needed to express how betrayed she felt, even if it made the silence between them worse. The message was delivered, but Ava didn't respond. Jasmine waited. Her phone sat heavy in her hand as the minutes stretched into hours. No answer. No apology. The pit in her stomach grew deeper with every passing second. She knew deep down that this wasn't just about Ava. This was about something bigger. Something much larger than the night at the restaurant. It was about how the world saw her. How people saw her. And she wasn't sure if she could ever make it right. The next morning, the weight of the previous night's events still hung over her. Jasmine struggled to focus as she got ready for work, pulling her hair back into a tight bun and dressing in one of her favorite blazers. It was a professional look, a power look. But today it felt like armor. It didn't protect her from the shame or the feeling of being exposed. It only helped her go through the motions. She had to get out of the house. She had to put on her mask and pretend like things were normal. She couldn't stay in her apartment, spiraling into self-doubt. But even the short drive to work couldn't clear her head. As she passed by the restaurant, it felt like a punch in the gut. The sleek glass exterior, the pristine sign, everything about it mocked her. It wasn't just the fact that she'd been kicked out. It was the subtle message, the power that they had over her, that made her feel like she didn't belong. It wasn't just the restaurant. It was everywhere. It was every institution, every corner of society where she had ever been made to feel lesser than. She pulled into the parking garage, still lost in thought, when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Hello," Jasmine answered, her voice still rough from the emotions of the night before. "Hi, is this Jasmine Mitchell?" A man's voice asked, sharp and professional. "Yes, this is she." "This is Greg Matthews, I'm with the Civil Rights Coalition," he said. "I received your complaint regarding the incident at the restaurant last night. We're taking it seriously and would like to discuss your case." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Her initial shock was replaced by a rush of adrenaline. "Wait, really? You're taking it seriously. Absolutely, Greg replied. This kind of treatment is unacceptable, and we've been tracking similar complaints against this chain. We'd like to offer you some guidance on how to proceed. Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope, something she hadn't felt since the incident. She sat down in her car, still gripping the phone. I don't know what to say. I was humiliated last night. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. Greg's voice softened. I understand, Jasmine. That's exactly why we want to help. We'll guide you through the process of filing a formal complaint, and if necessary, we'll escalate this to the proper authorities. You don't have to fight this alone. Jasmine's eyes closed for a moment. For the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of relief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Greg assured her they would be in touch soon to schedule a meeting, and they ended the call. Jasmine sat in her car for a moment longer, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. She wasn't alone. Someone was on her side. She couldn't forget what had happened at the restaurant. The humiliation, the sting of being dismissed. But now she had a choice. She could stay silent or she could fight. And for the first time since the manager's cold dismissal, Jasmine knew what she was going to do. The next few days were a blur. Jasmine barely slept, her mind running at full speed, processing everything that had happened. The manager's cold stare, Ava's silence, the sting of humiliation. The anger that had once burned so fiercely in her chest now simmered in the pit of her stomach, turning into something cold and determined. She kept herself busy at work, her focus sharp despite the internal chaos. Her co-workers noticed the change in her, but no one said anything. She didn't want their pity. She didn't want their sympathy. She just wanted this to be over, but she knew it wouldn't be that simple. This was bigger than her. It was about the way society had conditioned people to treat her, and people like her. It was about the constant, exhausting fight against a system that didn't care. Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from the Civil Rights Coalition, confirming her meeting with Greg Matthews. They had scheduled it for the following afternoon. Jasmine had no idea what to expect, but she couldn't turn back now. The thought of letting this slide, of being silenced, gnawed at her. No one else should have to go through what she did. She wouldn't let that happen. The next day, Jasmine arrived early at the Civil Rights Coalition's office. The building was modest, tucked away in a corner of the city where the high-rise offices and glitzy shops gave way to more practical, humble spaces. As she stepped inside, the air felt different. Not heavy like her apartment had been, but purposeful, like everyone who worked there was moving toward something important. It was a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing until now. She checked in at the front desk, and a woman behind the counter smiled warmly at her. You must be Jasmine, she said, her voice kind but firm. Greg's expecting you. Jasmine nodded, following the woman down a short hallway to an office at the back. The door was already open, and inside, Greg Matthews sat at a desk, flipping through papers. He looked up as she entered, giving her a welcoming smile that didn't feel forced. Jasmine, he said, standing up and extending a hand. It's good to meet you in person. I know this situation must be overwhelming, but you're in the right place. We'll get through this together. Jasmine shook his hand, a sense of relief flooding through her. For the first time in days, she felt like she wasn't alone. Thank you for helping me. I don't know where to start, but I know I can't just let this go. Greg motioned for her to sit down, and she did, settling into a chair across from him. The office was cluttered with files and paperwork, but there was an organized chaos to it, as though Greg had everything under control. He wasn't just another corporate lawyer. He was here for people like her, people who needed their voices amplified. I've been through situations like this before, Greg said, settling back into his chair. The first step is to take your story and make it heard. That's why we filed the initial complaint. But from here we need to build a case. And it's not just about the restaurant. It's about how they've treated you and others like you. How this behavior is part of a larger system. Jasmine nodded, absorbing his words. She'd heard stories of other people facing similar discrimination, but she had never really seen how all the pieces fit together. The layers of systemic racism were something she'd always known about, but only now did she fully understand its depth. "So what's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady. "We're going to take this public," Greg said, leaning forward slightly. "We'll start by contacting the media. There are outlets that will pick up a story like yours. The more people who know, the more pressure we can put on the restaurant. But we're also going to dig deeper. We'll look into whether this is an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. If it's the latter, we can push for more significant changes." The words rang in Jasmine's ears. Public. She had never imagined herself being the face of something so big. She had always kept her head down, always tried to fit in. But now it was impossible to ignore the truth. She had to do this not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated the way she had. "What if it gets worse?" Jasmine asked, her voice shaking despite herself. "What if people turn against me? I've seen the way the world reacts to things like this." Greg's expression softened. "It's going to be tough. It always is. People will try to tear you down. You'll have people questioning your motives, calling you an instigator. But you know what? You're not alone in this. There's a community out there, one that understands what you're going through and is ready to fight with you." Jasmine took a deep breath. The path ahead was uncertain, but she could see it now, clearer than ever. She wasn't just fighting for an apology from a manager. She was fighting for a larger cause. "We'll start by contacting the restaurant and demanding a meeting with their legal team. If they want to resolve this quietly, they can't just sweep it under the rug." "We're taking this seriously," Greg said, his voice firm. Jasmine's heart raced, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was because she felt the stirrings of something bigger inside her. She was ready to take on the fight. "All right," she said, a quiet determination in her voice. "Let's do it. I'm ready." Over the next few days, the wheels began to turn. Jasmine worked with Greg and the Civil Rights Coalition to prepare her case. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated incident. Other Black patrons had reported similar treatment at the same restaurant chain, but most had walked away, thinking their experiences weren't worth the fight. Jasmine knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let this moment pass. The restaurant would have to answer for what it had done, and if they tried to silence her, she would make sure the world knew the truth. But as the days passed, something else began to stir inside her, a quiet fear, the kind that gnawed at her gut. Could she really do this? Could she stand up to a powerful institution and change things? Jasmine looked out of the window, the city lights twinkling below. She was scared, yes. But more than that, she was angry. Angry at the injustice. Angry at how long this had been allowed to continue. She wasn't going to back down now. Not when she was this close. Jasmine hadn't expected the process to be easy, but nothing had prepared her for how difficult the next few weeks would be. As soon as the Civil Rights Coalition made the initial legal complaint to the restaurant chain, the company's legal team responded with swift, calculated force. It wasn't just a letter of denial. It was a well-drafted document designed to undermine everything she stood for. They made the claim that no such incident had occurred, that Jasmine had misunderstood the situation. Their version of events painted her as the aggressor, claiming that she had been rude and disruptive, that she had refused to follow restaurant policy. The audacity of it left Jasmine reeling. They were trying to turn her humiliation into her fault. She stared at the letter in her hands, the words blurring as she read and reread. How could they lie so easily, so confidently, when she knew the truth? It was maddening. They had the power, the influence, and the resources to bury her story. She knew she couldn't let them get away with it, but for a brief moment, doubt crept in. How could she possibly take on such a massive corporation? She sat in the small office of the Civil Rights Coalition, where the walls were lined with folders and legal books. The room smelled of old paper, and there was a heavy silence that felt both comforting and suffocating. Greg Matthews was sitting across from her, reading the letter with a calm that made her feel more anxious by the second. "I'm not surprised," Greg said, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms. This is typical. They'll try to discredit you. They'll throw everything they can at you. I didn't think it would be like this, Jasmine said quietly, her fingers clenching around the paper. I thought I was doing the right thing. But now they're just making it sound like I'm crazy. Like I'm making all of this up. Greg looked at her, his expression thoughtful. They're betting on you backing down, Jasmine. They're betting on your fear. But here's the thing. They wouldn't have gone through the trouble of writing this letter if they didn't see you as a threat. A small spark of determination flickered in Jasmine's chest at his words. She had been so focused on the overwhelming nature of the situation that she hadn't seen it like that before. This was a fight, not just against the restaurant, but against everything that allowed companies like this to operate without consequences. Greg continued, his voice steady. This is a marathon, not a sprint. They're hoping you'll lose your nerve, but I'm here to help you every step of the way. We'll gather evidence, we'll talk to others who've been wronged by this restaurant, and we'll make them answer for their actions. Jasmine took a deep breath, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I'm not backing down, she said, her voice barely above a whisper but full of conviction. I can't. Greg smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't just reassuring but knowing. That's exactly why we're going to win. Over the next few days, Jasmine's case took on a life of its own. The Civil Rights Coalition helped her gather testimonials from other Black patrons who had experienced similar treatment at the restaurant chain. Each story was more heartbreaking than the last. People who had been belittled, ignored, or outright discriminated against, all because of the color of their skin. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of solidarity with these strangers. Their pain was her pain. Their injustice was hers to carry now. She read through each of their statements, their words resonating with her, fueling her anger and pushing her forward. But every night when she went to bed, the anxiety returned. The fear of what was coming, the media scrutiny, the backlash, the potential for people to attack her character, haunted her dreams. Jasmine's friends had all but disappeared from her life. She'd heard nothing from Ava since that night, no apologies, no messages. It hurt more than she cared to admit. She had expected Ava to be there for her, to stand by her side. But Ava had chosen to stay silent, to let the pressure of the situation overwhelm her. Jasmine tried not to hold it against her, but the betrayal stung. And yet, the silence from her friend only fueled Jasmine's resolve. If Ava couldn't handle standing with her, if others couldn't find the courage to speak out, Jasmine would stand alone if she had to. She had the truth on her side, and no matter how difficult it got, no matter how alone she felt, she couldn't let that truth slip away. A week later, Jasmine stood outside a news station, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the press conference that would put her story on the map. She had been nervous about the media aspect of the case from the beginning. She wasn't someone who sought the spotlight. But the reality was clear. She needed the public's attention, their awareness, to force the restaurant to take responsibility for what they had done. The cameras were already set up when Greg arrived with 2 representatives from the Civil Rights Coalition. Jasmine stood off to the side, her fingers playing nervously with the hem of her jacket. The weight of what she was about to do settled heavy in her chest. "Are you ready?" Greg asked, his voice low but encouraging. She nodded, her breath shaky. "I think so." Greg placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this for anyone but yourself. But just know that by standing up, you're standing for so many others. You're going to make a difference." Jasmine took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart thudding in her chest. The lights of the cameras flickered on, and for a moment, she felt like she was under a microscope. She adjusted her stance, standing taller than she had ever felt before. The journalist holding the microphone turned to her. "Jasmine, can you tell us what happened that night?" Jasmine's voice wavered at first, but then she steadied herself. "That night I was humiliated. But it wasn't just about me. This is about everyone who's ever been treated like they don't belong. This is about a system that allows people to get away with this kind of behavior. And I'm not going to let it stand. I'm here to make sure that no one else has to go through what I did." Her words rang out in the microphone, louder than she had expected. She could see the journalists taking notes, the people behind the cameras watching her with rapt attention. And then something strange happened. It wasn't just the pressure of the moment that made her feel empowered. It was the realization that, for once, she was no longer invisible. For once, she had a voice, and the world was finally listening. The press conference wasn't just a turning point for Jasmine's case. It was a turning point for her, personally. She felt the weight of the world shift slightly in her favor, and while the battle was far from over, she knew that she had just made a move that couldn't be undone. The restaurant was now under the spotlight, and they couldn't escape. But neither could Jasmine. She had chosen this fight, and now she had to see it through. The days following the press conference were a blur of activity. The media coverage was relentless. Reporters called, journalists interviewed her, and her story was splashed across newspapers and online platforms. Every time Jasmine opened her email, there was another request for an interview or comment, another news outlet asking to hear her side of the story. At first, it felt like an exhilarating rush, like she was doing something important, something that mattered. But as the days wore on, the weight of it all began to settle in. The constant attention was exhausting. The emails didn't stop. The phone calls didn't stop. The barrage of questions, the media in her face, the people analyzing her every word. It was overwhelming. She had done the right thing, she reminded herself. She had to keep telling herself that. At work, her co-workers acted as though nothing had changed, but their avoidance spoke volumes. Jasmine knew they had seen her story on the news. They had seen the headlines. A few of them, like her manager, gave her polite nods or forced smiles, but the tension in the office was thick. The whispering was harder to ignore. But it wasn't the professional discomfort that bothered her the most. It was the personal betrayal. Ava still hadn't reached out. Not even a word. Jasmine had tried to call her several times after the press conference, desperate for some kind of support, some kind of explanation for what had happened between them. Each time Ava's phone went straight to voicemail. Not a single response. Jasmine had to admit it now. Ava wasn't going to stand by her. She wasn't going to fight for her. She wasn't going to apologize. The bitterness curled inside her chest like a knot that tightened every time she thought about it. "Jazz, can we talk?" Jasmine didn't recognize the voice at first. She turned around in her office chair to find another coworker, Lisa, standing in the doorway. Lisa was one of the few people who hadn't completely distanced herself from Jasmine, but even she had been quiet ever since the press conference. Jasmine nodded, putting the phone down and wiping her hands on her skirt. "Sure. Come in." Lisa stepped into the office and shut the door behind her. There was an awkward pause as she glanced down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. I just wanted to say that I saw the interview," Lisa said, her voice hesitant. "And I admire what you're doing. You're really brave for standing up like this." Jasmine didn't know how to respond. Lisa had always been kind to her, but now she wasn't sure where she stood. There was something about the way she spoke that felt like sympathy, like pity. Jasmine had heard that tone before, the one that came from people who meant well but didn't truly understand the gravity of what she was going through. "I don't need bravery," Jasmine said quietly, her voice colder than she intended. "I just need people to be decent." Lisa winced but didn't back away. "I know. I'm sorry if that came off wrong. I just wanted you to know that I support you. Even if it's hard to be in the office right now. I don't know what it's like for you, but I see what you're going through." Jasmine swallowed hard, feeling the emotions she had been keeping locked inside rise up, threatening to overwhelm her. The feeling of being seen but not truly understood was suffocating. It made her feel even more isolated, as though she was carrying this heavy burden alone. "Thank you," Jasmine said stiffly, offering a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But right now it's not just about support. It's about getting justice. And no one should have to deal with what I did just because of the color of their skin." Lisa nodded slowly, but before she could speak again, the phone on Jasmine's desk buzzed. She quickly reached for it, seeing a message from her phone's screen. It was from Ava. Ava, Jazz, I'm so sorry. I've been avoiding you. I've been trying to figure out what to say. Can we talk? Jasmine's stomach twisted at the sight of the message. She stared at it for a long time, unsure of how to feel. She wanted to scream at her friend for being so selfish, for waiting until the media storm had already passed to send a half-hearted apology. But part of her, the part that had been her friend for years, wanted to hear Ava out. She typed a quick reply, not allowing herself to overthink it. Jasmine. I don't know what there is to say, Ava. You weren't there when I needed you. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off. She hesitated before sending it, but the message was already sent before she could stop herself. Ava's response came almost immediately. Ava, I get it. I've been selfish, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope you know I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Jasmine stared at the text, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't an apology she had expected, or wanted really. Ava had admitted that she hadn't been there when it mattered. But even now, Jasmine didn't know what to do with it. I think I need some time, Jasmine said, her voice quieter now. She looked up at Lisa, who was still standing by the door, watching her with concern. But thank you for checking in. Lisa nodded, her face softening. Take your time. We're all here for you when you're ready. Jasmine gave her a small nod as she sat back in her chair, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her mind was spinning in circles. The anger she had felt toward Ava was giving way to confusion, and beneath it all, a deep sense of loneliness was taking root. The press conference had given her a sense of purpose, but it hadn't prepared her for the emotional fallout that would follow. The isolation, the subtle betrayals, the way the people she thought she could count on had abandoned her. And still, through it all, the restaurant's legal team pushed forward with their defense. They had released a statement denying any racial bias, claiming that Jasmine's treatment was the result of a misunderstanding, nothing more. They doubled down on their narrative that she had been disruptive and aggressive. Jasmine was furious. But this time she wasn't just angry at the restaurant. She was angry at herself for letting the doubt creep in, for letting her emotions unravel her in the face of everything she had fought for. She was angry at Ava, at the people who refused to stand with her, and most of all, at the injustice that had put her in this position in the first place. But she wasn't going to give up. No matter how alone she felt, Jasmine knew she couldn't back down now. The battle was far from over, and if she had to fight it on her own, she would. The truth would come out. It had to. The media storm that Jasmine had reluctantly stepped into was beginning to grow larger by the day. What had started as a simple statement, one woman's story of discrimination in an upscale restaurant, had quickly escalated into something far more significant. News outlets picked up the story, and social media exploded with reactions. People were sharing their own experiences of racial discrimination in restaurants, in offices, in stores, across every part of society. Jasmine didn't expect to become the face of this movement. She had been thrust into it, pushed by the injustice she'd faced, but now it seemed like the world was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. And Jasmine felt like she was carrying the weight of it all. Her phone rang constantly now. Reporters, journalists, friends from her past, old co-workers. Everyone wanted to talk to her, wanted her perspective on everything. Some were supportive, others were less than kind. The trolls had emerged too, leaving hateful comments online, questioning her motives, attacking her character. It was too much. One evening, after another long day of phone calls and interviews, Jasmine sank onto her couch, her phone in her hand. She had been avoiding checking her social media, but tonight she couldn't help it. The first post that caught her eye was from an online news outlet that had covered her story extensively. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Restaurant apologizes to disruptive customer, but was this all just a setup?" Jasmine's heart sank as she clicked on the article. The story twisted her words, framing her as a troublemaker who was only trying to stir up drama. They called her actions grandstanding, and suggested she had fabricated the whole incident. The sting was sharp, but Jasmine had expected this. She had braced herself for the inevitable backlash from those who didn't want to see the truth, who were comfortable in their privilege and unwilling to confront their own biases. But the worst part was seeing the comments. Thousands of people weighing in with their opinions, some supporting her, many more mocking her, calling her a race baiter, and accusing her of playing the victim. It felt like the whole world was telling her that she was wrong, that her pain didn't matter. Jasmine's fingers shook as she scrolled through the posts. She wanted to scream at the screen, to shout back at the people who didn't understand. But she couldn't. She couldn't let herself fall into the trap of responding. There was a knock at her door. She didn't feel like seeing anyone, but she reluctantly got up and answered it. Standing in the hallway was an older woman, dressed in business attire. Her presence was commanding, but there was kindness in her eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said with a gentle smile, "but I'm Carol Sutton. I'm with the National Organization for Racial Equality. I've been following your case, and I wanted to personally reach out to offer my support." Jasmine blinked in surprise. "Oh, thank you. I wasn't expecting a visitor." Carol chuckled lightly. "Most people aren't. May I come in?" Jasmine stepped aside, and Carol entered. The woman was poised, self-assured, her every movement measured and calm. She had the air of someone who had seen it all before. "I won't take much of your time," Carol said, sitting down on the couch. "I just wanted to let you know that we're standing with you, Jasmine. We're working with local organizations, reaching out to lawmakers, trying to push for systemic changes. And we want you to be a part of that." Jasmine felt a flicker of hope. This was the kind of support she needed. "Thank you," she said softly, sitting down beside her. "But it feels like everything is moving so fast. I'm not sure I can handle it anymore. It's overwhelming." Carol nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I understand. It's a lot to carry. But the reason you're feeling this way is because you're holding the weight of history. You're fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, and that's never easy. But it's worth it." Jasmine took a deep breath. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that this would lead to something more than just her story. But she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how loud the voices were, no matter how many people rallied behind her, things would never really change. "I don't know if I can do it," Jasmine admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted to be the face of something this big. I just wanted what was right. I just wanted an apology. But now, I feel like I'm being torn apart." Carol reached over and placed a hand on Jasmine's. "You're not alone, Jasmine. And you don't have to do this alone. There are people who are going to stand beside you every step of the way. You just have to keep going." Jasmine nodded slowly, wiping away a tear. Carol's words, simple as they were, felt like a lifeline. But as the days went by, the pressure only grew. Jasmine's name was everywhere. It wasn't just local news anymore. It was national. She saw her face on the covers of magazines, in interviews on television. People were paying attention now, and while the support was encouraging, it only magnified the intensity of the hate. People were throwing their opinions at her from every direction, telling her she was either a hero or a villain, but never allowing her the space to simply be a person. It was late one night when she got a call from Greg. He sounded urgent, and his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Jasmine, I need you to be ready. We've got something big coming." "What's going on?" she asked, her heart racing. "The restaurant's legal team has reached out. They want to settle. They're offering an apology, compensation. And they want this to go away quietly. But they want to meet with you first." Jasmine was stunned into silence. She had expected this day, but it felt surreal. After everything she had gone through, the endless media coverage, the people who had attacked her, the pain, it was finally coming to a head. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I'm so tired. I thought this would be over, but it feels like it's just beginning." Greg's voice softened. "You've done what so many others couldn't, Jasmine. You've already won in so many ways. But now you have the power. The decision is yours." The words settled heavily in her chest. It was her choice now. She had the power to decide if the fight was worth it, to decide if justice could truly be achieved through a settlement or if it would be another quiet injustice swept under the rug. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just going to accept the restaurant's apology and move on. She wasn't going to let them dictate the terms of her story. Not after everything. Not after all the pain. "I'm not taking their settlement," Jasmine said firmly, her voice steady. "I'm going to make sure this stays in the public eye. I'm going to make sure that they can't sweep this under the rug." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Greg's voice came through, proud and resolute. "That's the Jasmine I know." Jasmine hung up the phone, her heart pounding with a renewed sense of purpose. She was going to fight this until the end. No matter how hard it was. No matter how much it cost her. The fight wasn't over yet. And she wasn't backing down. The next few days felt like a slow march toward an inevitable confrontation. Jasmine had spent hours reviewing her options, talking with Greg and the Civil Rights Coalition, and weighing the potential consequences. They had advised her to stand firm, not to let the restaurant settle and sweep everything under the rug. They wanted her to make sure this was more than just a financial settlement. This was about justice. And yet, when the call came, it wasn't what she had expected. Greg's voice, calm but slightly strained, came through the phone as Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Jasmine, I've just gotten word from the restaurant's legal team. They're not going to settle in the traditional sense. They want a meeting. With you. Specifically. The manager who was involved in the incident, David Heller, is willing to meet and offer a personal apology." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The manager. The man who had been so cold, so dismissive. The one who had kicked her out of the restaurant with such authority and disdain. "They want me to meet with him," she repeated, trying to process what she was hearing. "That's right. They want to avoid the media circus and keep it low-key. They're offering compensation and an apology. They want this whole thing to end quietly, without any more press coverage. But they want to do it face-to-face, and they want you to accept his apology personally." Jasmine felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to meet him. She didn't want to be in the same room as the person who had humiliated her, reduced her to a non-person in front of an entire restaurant. How could he possibly apologize for that? She wasn't sure she could handle his hollow words. "I don't know if I can do this," Jasmine said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "What if it's just another excuse? What if he's not sincere?" Greg's voice was steady, reassuring. "That's a valid concern, Jasmine. But this is an opportunity for you to get answers. To hear him say, in his own words, why he treated you the way he did. You're in control of this situation now. You don't have to accept the apology, and you don't have to let this go until you're ready. But don't let this moment slip by." Jasmine sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to refuse. She didn't want to give this man the satisfaction of a personal apology. But another part of her, the part that had been fighting this fight since that night, knew she couldn't avoid it. She had to confront him. She had to hear it from him. Only then would she know if it was genuine, if there was any real remorse behind the words. "Okay," Jasmine said after a long pause. "I'll meet with him. But I'm not just going to sit there and let him brush it off. I'm not going to let this be swept under the rug." Greg's response was quick. "We'll be there with you. Every step of the way." The day of the meeting, Jasmine woke up early, her mind already racing with thoughts of what was to come. She dressed carefully, not to impress, but to armor herself in a way that would help her feel strong. She chose a simple yet professional black blazer. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore little makeup. She wanted to look confident, but she also wanted to feel like herself, not like someone who was playing a part. As she made her way to the restaurant, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread gnawing at her stomach. This was the moment of truth. What would he say? Would he actually apologize? Or would it be some half-hearted attempt to placate her and avoid further publicity? The restaurant was nearly empty when she arrived, the lunch rush still a few hours away. A host, unfamiliar with her, led her to a private room in the back. The manager, David Heller, was already seated at a table, waiting. Jasmine's footsteps echoed on the wooden floors as she walked into the room. He stood when she entered, his face a mask of professionalism. He was dressed in a suit, though it didn't seem to make him appear any more sincere. Jasmine barely made eye contact as she took the seat across from him. "Ms. Mitchell," David said, his voice stiff. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Jasmine said nothing, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but she wasn't going to make this easy. Not this time. David shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable under her silence. "I wanted to personally apologize for my actions that night. I know that I treated you unfairly, and I deeply regret the way I handled the situation." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This was just the beginning. She wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. "Do you?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Do you really regret it? Or are you just here because you've been forced to apologize to avoid more media backlash?" David hesitated, then looked away, his gaze flickering toward the floor. I was wrong," he said finally, his tone softer. "I let my personal biases affect my decision-making. I shouldn't have asked you to leave. And I certainly shouldn't have treated you the way I did." Jasmine looked at him, her anger simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't enough. He wasn't taking responsibility for what had happened. He wasn't fully acknowledging the hurt he had caused her. "You're not sorry for just kicking me out, are you?" Jasmine said, her voice low but filled with a quiet fury. "You're sorry because you got caught. You're sorry because you've been dragged into this by the media, by the truth. You're sorry because now you're looking at the consequences of your actions." David's eyes flicked up to hers, guilt etched into his features. "You're right. I'm not just sorry because of the publicity. I'm sorry because I see now that I failed you. And I failed everyone who has ever been treated like this. I'm not proud of what I did. I've learned from this." Jasmine wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him that his apology wasn't enough, that it didn't fix the years of pain that people like her had suffered. But a part of her understood. He didn't understand, not fully. He couldn't. "I'm glad you see that," she said quietly. "But seeing it doesn't fix it. You have to change. And this isn't just about me. It's about the way people like you, people in power, treat people like me. You have the power to make real change. Do better." David nodded, his eyes downcast. "I will. I promise." Jasmine's hands clenched into fists on the table, but she didn't look away from him. "This isn't over," she said. "This is just the beginning." As she stood to leave, she felt a strange sense of finality. The apology hadn't healed everything. It hadn't made her feel whole again, but it had opened the door for something bigger. Something that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone who had faced the same discrimination. The real work was still ahead. And Jasmine was ready. The aftermath of the meeting with David Heller was a strange blend of relief and unresolved tension. Jasmine had walked away from the table with no immediate answers, just the lingering weight of what had been said, and what had not been said. She had heard his apology, but it had come wrapped in layers of corporate self-preservation, and that made it harder to accept. Still, she had stood her ground. She had demanded more than words. She had demanded accountability. In the days that followed, the restaurant chain released an official statement acknowledging the incident, citing a lapse in judgment on the part of their staff and pledging to implement new diversity and sensitivity training for all employees. It was a vague, corporate-speak response, but it was a response nonetheless. The company was trying to salvage their reputation. The public backlash had been too great to ignore, but Jasmine knew that this was only the first step. She wouldn't let them off the hook so easily. The city had begun to settle into a new normal, though the effects of the case still rippled through her life. Jasmine was exhausted, emotionally drained from the constant media presence, the interviews, the questions that she had to answer over and over again. But despite the toll it took on her, she couldn't deny that there was a sense of victory. She had forced the issue into the open. She had made people listen. She hadn't heard much from Ava since their conversation a week ago. Ava's apologies had been sincere. At least, Jasmine believed they had been. But the damage had been done. The friendship had changed in ways that couldn't be undone. Ava had apologized for not standing with her when it mattered most, but the trust that Jasmine had placed in her was fractured. Jasmine had spent hours thinking about their relationship, about what it meant to lose a friend over something like this. She had wanted Ava to stand with her, to fight alongside her. Instead, Ava had stayed silent, unwilling to face the uncomfortable truth of systemic racism. Jasmine couldn't blame her for the fear, but she also couldn't accept it. Still, she was starting to accept that she didn't need to carry the weight of this fight alone. The world was full of people who had stood with her, supported her, and understood her. There was a community, a larger movement that was rising up, demanding change. She wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, invisible, or less than. And that fight wasn't going to end with an apology from a manager or a corporate statement. A few weeks later, Jasmine stood at the front of a crowded room in a local community center, speaking at a rally. The room was filled with activists, community leaders, and regular people who had come to show their support. A banner hung on the wall behind her, reading, #WeWantToBeSilent. It was a simple message, but it resonated deeply with everyone who had gathered. Jasmine looked out over the crowd, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. But when she saw the faces in the audience, faces filled with hope, with determination, she felt a surge of strength. This was bigger than her. This was about all of them. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been through a lot these past few months. It hasn't been easy. But what's kept me going is knowing that I'm not alone. I've heard your stories. I've read your messages. We've all faced this kind of injustice, and we've all felt the sting of discrimination. But we're here today to say that we won't be silent anymore." The crowd cheered, and Jasmine took a deep breath, finding her rhythm. "I didn't start this fight because I wanted attention. I started it because I was tired. I was tired of feeling like my voice didn't matter. I was tired of being ignored. But what I've learned through all of this is that we are powerful when we come together. We can make change. It's not going to happen overnight, but we can make it happen. We've already started." She paused, scanning the room, letting her words sink in. "And to those who are still trying to silence us, to those who think we'll back down, that we'll forget, you're wrong. This isn't just about one restaurant. This is about a system that's been in place for far too long. A system that tells people like me that we don't belong, that we're not good enough. We're here to dismantle that system. We're here to fight for what's right." The crowd erupted into applause, the energy in the room infectious. Jasmine felt a sense of solidarity, a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found her place in this fight. And it wasn't just about her story anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, marginalized, or treated unjustly. Later that evening, Jasmine walked out of the community center, the weight of the rally still settling on her shoulders. She hadn't known how much she needed to speak out until she had done it. It felt like the first time in a long while that she could breathe deeply, knowing that she wasn't alone, knowing that the fight was bigger than any one person. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out to see a message from Greg. "Greg, the restaurant chain just announced they've made a multi-million-dollar donation to racial justice organizations. They're going to be rolling out a new corporate diversity policy as well. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And it's because of you." Jasmine stared at the message for a long moment. The restaurant chain's donation was a significant step forward, a sign that her fight hadn't been in vain. But as Greg had said, it wasn't perfect. She knew the real work was just beginning. The donation didn't fix the systemic issues. It didn't undo the years of racism, bigotry, and exclusion. But it was a start. She put her phone back in her pocket and looked up at the sky. The evening was warm, the stars barely visible through the urban haze, but it didn't matter. Jasmine knew that the fight was far from over. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready for it. Because in the end, it wasn't about the apology from one manager or the statement from one company. It was about the larger fight. The fight for dignity, for equality, for the right to be seen and heard. And Jasmine Mitchell was just getting started. Jasmine had thought that once the restaurant chain had apologized, once the press conferences had died down, and the media coverage had subsided, the fight would end. But what she quickly learned was that real change wasn't something that happened in one fell swoop. It wasn't something that was neatly packaged into a statement or a check. It was a slow, grinding process that tested her resolve every single day. The weeks following the rally had been a whirlwind. Despite the public apology and the corporate donation, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that the restaurant was trying to move on without addressing the deeper issues. The sensitivity training, while well-meaning, felt like a band-aid on a wound that needed much more. She knew that the work wasn't over. But this time the frustration didn't feel paralyzing, it felt motivating. She spent her days working with the Civil Rights Coalition, helping to craft a new wave of community organizing. They planned forums, rallies, and workshops aimed at raising awareness about racial inequality in the service industry, particularly in high-end restaurants. Jasmine worked with people who had lived experiences similar to hers, learning from them and sharing her own story. They were all in this together, fighting for something larger than just one incident. It felt like a small step toward dismantling a much bigger issue. At night, Jasmine's thoughts often turned inward. The personal cost of this journey was starting to hit her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The exhaustion was taking a toll on her body and mind. Even with the support she had from the coalition and the growing movement behind her, loneliness lingered in the quiet moments. She missed having a friend she could talk to. Ava had reached out once or twice, offering half-hearted apologies, but their relationship had changed beyond repair. Jasmine didn't have the energy to try to rebuild it. She had friends now, yes, but they weren't the same. These weren't the people she'd laughed with over happy hours or shared her dreams with. These were strangers who had become allies. They understood the weight of the fight in ways that Ava never would. One late afternoon, as Jasmine sat at her kitchen table reviewing the latest draft of a speech she was preparing for an upcoming rally, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Greg. "Greg, I think we need to talk. Can you meet tomorrow morning? I have something important to discuss." Jasmine frowned, momentarily distracted by the sudden urgency in his message. She had a lot on her plate and wasn't sure what more there was to discuss. Still, she set down the speech and sent a quick reply. "Jasmine, sure, Greg. What's up?" "Greg, we'll talk in person. I'll explain tomorrow." Jasmine let out a quiet sigh as she put her phone down. The mystery of it left her unsettled, but she pushed it out of her mind for the moment. She needed to focus. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The next morning, she met Greg at a small cafe, just a few blocks from her apartment. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around, nursing their coffee and reading newspapers. Greg was already there, seated at a table in the back corner, his expression serious. When he saw her, he stood up and gestured for her to sit. "Thanks for coming on short notice," Greg said, his voice unusually somber. "No problem," Jasmine replied, sitting across from him. "What's going on? You sounded urgent in your message." Greg took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been contacted by a few of the people who've been following your case. They're asking for you to take the next step. They want you to consider running for office." Jasmine blinked in surprise. "Wait, what? You're kidding, right?" Greg shook his head. "I'm not. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. There's a real momentum behind you right now. You've gained a lot of attention. People are listening to your story, and they're inspired. They want someone like you in the fight, someone who's lived it, someone who can take that experience and turn it into real systemic change. There's an open seat in the city council elections this year. Several people think you're the right person to fill it." Jasmine sat back in her chair, stunned. Her mind raced. Politics, felt like a leap too far, too fast. She wasn't sure if she had the right skills for that kind of position. Her world had always been about advocacy, about giving a voice to the voiceless, not about working behind the scenes in a government office. "But I've never run for office. I don't have any political experience," she said, trying to wrap her head around it. "I'm not a politician." Greg nodded. "I know, but that's part of your appeal. You're not a typical politician. You're someone who's seen the injustices firsthand. You've got the passion, the drive, and you're already advocating for change. Running for office could amplify that. It could give you a platform to make a real difference, not just in one restaurant, but for an entire community." Jasmine felt a weight settle in her chest. The idea was both terrifying and tantalizing. She could make real, lasting change. She could stand for something bigger than herself. But was she ready for that kind of responsibility? "I don't know," Jasmine said, her voice low. "I'm still figuring things out. The fight is still so personal for me. How can I focus on running for office when there's so much left to be done?" Greg leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "The fight will never be over. There will always be work to do, always more people to help. But if you want to take your activism to the next level, if you want to truly change the system, this is one way to do it. You have the chance to influence policy, to be at the table where decisions are made. And you can't do that unless you're in the room. So I'm asking you to think about it. You don't have to decide today, but you've got the potential to do something incredible." Jasmine sat in silence, her mind racing with the possibilities. She thought about the years of struggle she had witnessed, the voices she had helped amplify, the people who had been left behind. She thought about the restaurant, about the moment she had stood her ground and forced the world to listen. What if this was her next step? What if she could push for change on a larger scale? Could she make a difference in politics the way she had in the streets? "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. Greg smiled, nodding in understanding. "Take all the time you need. But remember, the world is watching. And sometimes when the world is watching, it's up to you to decide how you want to shape the future." Jasmine left the cafe, the weight of Greg's words settling over her like a heavy cloak. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. And wherever it led her, whether to City Hall or somewhere else entirely, she would continue to stand for what was right. The struggle continued, but so did her resolve. And for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt ready to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed Greg's proposition weighed heavily on Jasmine's mind. She'd thought the fight was about the restaurant, about making a point that racism and discrimination could no longer be overlooked or tolerated. But as she continued to work with the Civil Rights Coalition and the growing network of allies she had made, the realization began to settle in. The fight was bigger than one restaurant, one moment, or even one city. It was about systemic change. Jasmine had always fought with her heart, with her passion, but now she had to ask herself the toughest question of all. Was she ready to fight on a larger stage? Was she ready to take the leap into politics, to transform the work she had been doing on the ground into something that could influence real, lasting change? It wasn't an easy decision. The idea of running for office seemed surreal. She wasn't polished like the politicians she had seen on TV. She wasn't part of the system. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood that her outsider status was exactly why she had something valuable to offer. The system needed people like her. People who had lived through the struggles, who understood the pain of being overlooked, marginalized, and ignored. It needed people who would fight for the voiceless, not for their own political gain. One morning, as Jasmine sipped her coffee in the kitchen, she made the decision. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. She had already been through hell and come out on the other side stronger than ever. Running for office would be a challenge, but it was a challenge she could face head-on. She was ready. She texted Greg that morning, "I'm in. Let's do this." The message was simple, but it felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She felt her resolve solidify. Greg called her almost immediately. "You sure about this?" "Yeah," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "I'm sure. It's time." Her decision wasn't made in isolation. In the days that followed, Jasmine met with community leaders, activists, and even former local politicians who had been through similar battles. She gathered advice, wisdom, and resources, and began shaping a campaign that was rooted in the experiences of the very people she was fighting for. Her campaign wasn't going to be about flashy promises or rhetoric. It was going to be about action, about creating real change where it mattered, in the lives of the people who had been left behind for too long. She learned quickly that a campaign wasn't just about her message. It was about building a network of support. She made connections with local grassroots organizations, labor unions, and civil rights groups, all of whom were eager to support her candidacy. The ground-level support was overwhelming, and it gave her the confidence to keep moving forward. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was the fight of a whole community, a whole city. But even with all the support, the road ahead was daunting. The political machine was vast, its gears already in motion, and Jasmine knew she was stepping into a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. There would be opposition, fierce opposition. There would be people who would question her, dismiss her, and try to tear her down. But Jasmine didn't care. She had already fought battles far bigger than this. She was ready. The first campaign event was a small gathering, just a handful of people in a community center in one of the city's most disenfranchised neighborhoods. Jasmine stood before the crowd, feeling both nervous and exhilarated. This was her first public appearance as a candidate, and though it wasn't a huge crowd, the energy in the room was palpable. These were the people who needed a voice. These were the people who had been ignored for far too long. She stepped up to the podium, feeling the weight of the moment. Her speech was short, but every word carried meaning. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice firm. "I'm standing here today because I believe that all of us, no matter where we come from, no matter the color of our skin, no matter our economic status, deserve to be treated with dignity. We deserve a seat at the table, not just to be heard, but to be respected." The crowd nodded, some clapping softly, others whispering in agreement. "I'm running for office because I know what it feels like to be ignored, to be pushed aside, to be told that you don't matter. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I refuse to let that happen to anyone else. It's time for us to take back control of our futures." She paused, letting her words sink in, then continued. "This campaign isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Together, we can make this city a place where every single person has the opportunity to thrive, not just survive. We can create a city where justice is real, where equality is the norm, and where our voices are heard loud and clear." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jasmine felt her heart swell. This was why she had started this journey. This was the kind of power she wanted to build. Power that was rooted in the people, not the establishment. Power that was grounded in the truth, not in the lies that had been fed to her for so long. As the campaign progressed, the challenges mounted. The opposition came in full force, trying to undermine her every step of the way. They used her past against her, twisted her words, and threw everything they had at her. They said she was inexperienced, too angry, too radical. They tried to paint her as someone who couldn't be trusted to lead. But Jasmine wasn't fazed. The more they attacked her, the more resolute she became. Every insult, every smear, only fueled her determination to keep going. She knew that her fight wasn't just against the political elite. It was against a system that had been built on inequality and oppression for far too long. She wasn't going to back down. Her team grew stronger with every rally, every phone call, every person she met. The support from the community, the people who had believed in her from the beginning, kept her going. She had a purpose now, a bigger purpose than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one city council seat. This was about dismantling the systems of oppression that had held people down for generations. And Jasmine was going to be part of that change. The night of the election was tense. Jasmine sat in a small office with her campaign team, watching the results come in. Her heart raced as the numbers flashed across the screen. The opposition was strong, but her people, her community, had turned out in droves. As the final results were announced, Jasmine held her breath. And then it came, she had won. The room erupted into cheers. Jasmine stood there, stunned, her hands shaking as she looked at the screen. It was real. She had done it. She had made history. But the fight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. She had a seat at the table now. And she wasn't going to let it go to waste. Jasmine Mitchell had won. And the world was about to change.